we had an opportunity to unbox this fine piece of equipment right here, and we're kind of checking it out a little bit. Pretty lightweight, definitely feels pretty good in your hands. The pistol grip has got a little bit different shape than what we're looking at in the 461 and like what we see on the 440 044s. It's a little more flat across the bottom, I'm noticing, just with my thumb on here and my fingers on the bottom. You can tell that it's got a little bit different contour. It's actually a little more like what we see on the 272. It's a little more square. I'm not sure why they got away from the pistol grip aspect, but you know, that's the way things go. Definitely has a interesting cylinder cover. We're going to get into the bench talk version of this eventually here. We're going to have a bit of tea here for a second and say thanks. This is in commemoration of the gentleman that owns this saw, my buddy Dave. I'm going to have a bit of tea. Thanks for sending it over, technically. Now that I have it, I might be holding it for ransom for a while, so what do you think of that one? Anyway, you can check his channel out in the wood. It's all run together, all lowercase. Wood is singular, out in the wood. He does a lot of Sitka spruce. I don't know if I could handle a steady diet of Sitka spruce anymore. I did it for a few years straight, and it's impressive. I think there were 3 days in 2 years that I did not get pinched one time. That's kind of saying a lot, I guess. But anyway, I digress. Back on track since we're looking at this saw. He kind of mentioned all the openings in here. It looks to me like it's a good way to get brush caught in there. That's kind of the thing he was talking about as well. It's definitely super cool looking. It's kind of interesting, I guess. I have to do some cleanup on this thing before we run it, evidently. But you can look in there and see that it has a few miles. Hopefully I can get the owner to chime in on how much time it has on it. You can see in here there's some tubes and hoses and all kinds of cool stuff. Spring mounted, we're noticing that right there. You can see those. It's got the new style or the new color fuel filter element in there already, so that's kind of cool. And you can see the motherboards, I think, over on this side down low in there somewhere. Plenty of interesting things going on. I kind of wish they used a little bit bigger wiring, personally. Some of the technicians that work for Stihl have actually had some problems tearing those wires in half themselves. And so it doesn't take much. And these things kind of take a beating. So one of the things I've been curious about is the weight factor. I have a set of shop scales. They are not weights and measure accurate by any stretch of the imagination. So we're not going to even go down that road. But we will get relative numbers between these saws. 14.6. If we start taking a look at some other saws, this is a curiosity point. My 462 comes in at 15.2, but it's been used, has a lot of buildup, and there's actually oil in the tank. I probably should have drained the oil, but it's not going to be a relative accurate weight because it's got so much crap from actual use. If we want to take a look at a 462 West Coast trim version, I did start this thing and run it a little bit, ran it through a heat cycle, but then I drained all the gas and the oil, so it's similar to what we see with the 500i. 3/4 wrap with the big kid clutch cover on it, and this saw comes in at 14.2 on these scales. Big kid clutch cover. big kid dogs. That's something that I coined. Pretty cherry 440 here. Comes in at 15.0. But this saw has been used and it has buildup as well. West Coast trim. Ready to rock and roll. So as we continue the saga with the 500i, I actually made an addition onto the half wrap. I made a full wrap system for this particular saw, all homemade. I did it all by myself. I did weld within 1/2 of an inch of the sheath and didn't manage to nuke it, so I was well pleased about that. And then we have a weld right here, which I tried something new, but it actually feels pretty good. I'm thinking that you can see what's going on here. And we also established that the heavy-duty clutch cover off the 462 actually mates up perfectly to the 500i, which, I mean, that makes sense. They did that with the heavy-duty clutch cover on the 044 to 660 models years ago. And curious about the weight. There's going to be a little bit extra weight with this saw because it's been used, so it has some buildup on it, but it's not overwhelmed with buildup and sawdust. So just for kicks, not weights and measure accurate by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not sure. Maybe we should reposition to see if we can actually take a look at the number on the scale. It came in at 16.8 before, 16.8 again. I'm thinking that you can see that, even though it's upside down. Fully fueled and oiled. So I thought that was kind of cool. If we take a look at the 461 replacement saw, fully fueled. Let's start over since I was adding to it. 17.6, quite a bit more than it was before. I think it was 17.4, maybe 17.3. We'll look at it from the other side real quick and see what we get. 17.6. So 17.6 consistently. About 0.8 of a pound. If we look at the 660, it's been coming in about 19.4. I think we can see that pretty consistently. And again, all three of these saws are fully fueled and ready to cut. That's a real world number. It's relative. It's not probably, like I said, weights and measure accurate by any stretch of the imagination, however, but quite a bit of differential between the 500i at 16.8, and I don't know if it's going to weigh a whole lot less with the factory version wrap handlebars or not, actually. But 0.8 of a pound or so. I think it came in at 17.4 last time, so it's varying a little bit. And 19.2, I guess it was. Quite a bit heavier. 7. Well, depends on which website you're looking at for horsepower. They range a little bit, 7.1, 7.2, 6.0, and 6.8. Completely stock under the hood at this point, and we're going to end up running it against my torque monster in stock form, and then we're going to run it after I get done zipping this saw and see how they compare. I'm hopeful that my 461 being down on displacement but old school muscle saw design actually takes it. That's what I'm hoping for. So we'll look forward to splicing this in with the rest of it. I just wanted to review on the 500i after we added, and that says 17.0 on this one. So a little bit of variance on the scales. .6 again. So, oops, maybe a little bit heavier than what the literature says at this point. I guess that's kind of what we're trying to establish. Take a look at this a little bit closer. Yeah, 500i. So that saw is my buddy Dave's. I'm trying to work a deal though and see if I can keep it. He doesn't know that yet, of course, but I'm working on him on the side here. But anyway, so my wife went to town and I just happened to get the good scales out because I wanted to see how far out of whack my standard issue shop scales are, because it weighs close. They weigh pretty close. I've been within 1/10 of a pound on some of the published information, so I thought I was thankful. It sounded hopeful anyway. We're close. So not weights and measures accurate. We're using a bathroom scale. So that's just the way that rolls. What I did do though, because I mean, does it really matter what a saw weighs without any gas or oil? Because you don't use them without gas or oil. You fill them up and you go to work. So it seemed prudent and realistic to fill both tanks up, gas and oil, and then actually weigh the machine and see what that number ends up being, because that's a real world number that's representative of what the saw would be in a work application. So we have the 500i, we have my personal 281, we have a bone stock 660. It's got the half wrap version dogs and clutch cover, so it's not exactly going to be completely accurate, but it's going to be pretty close. We have a West Coast version 661, my personal 64. So I made the dogs for the 281. The thing's kind of a lunker, actually, but you know, I mean, that saw was designed, it came out in 81, so they were working on the designs back in the late 70s on that saw. The 64 hit the deck, and I think it was about 84, so it's a little bit later in design. They're a little bit lighter, I think, and they're more displacement. This is around 80 cc's, I don't remember exactly. It has a 38 millimeter stroke and a 52 millimeter bore, where we have a 40 millimeter stroke and a 52 millimeter bore in the 064. So if we want to get down to brass tacks, we have a 56 millimeter bore and a 37 millimeter stroke in the 661, and we have a 54 millimeter bore and a 40 millimeter stroke in the 660. And I've been speculating. I finally got a look at the recently, and we're showing a 54 millimeter bore with that 500i. I had speculated that it was a 53 millimeter bore and a longer stroke. It's actually not. I'm trying to find the sheet that has that on there in this process. So basically it's a 34 millimeter stroke and a 54 millimeter bore. The wind is not helping this process whatsoever. It comes out to be 79.2. So if we look right here in the IPL, I'm thinking we can see the 54 millimeter number. I've never seen where they print out the stroke number necessarily in these. So 79.2 cc's, so it's got pretty decent displacement, but we're really interested in the full tank comparison between all the saws, I think. Well, I'm curious, so you're just going to go along for the ride, I guess. Now we're going to move this camera over, which is going to make it a little bit of a pain in the rear for everybody, but I'm thinking that we're able to see the screen so that I'm not blowing smoke here. Now this saw is pretty lightweight. We came up with 16.8 pounds on my other scales that are the old hand-me-downs. So let's see what these show. It's also 16.8. That's pretty sweet. I guess my shop scales are relatively accurate. Now, one thing we'll notice is, I don't know if you can see, the half wrap handlebar is how this saw was configured when it came. I noticed, I think I mentioned this in another video, I had a 462 in. I took the heavy duty version clutch cover, the wrap West Coast version, and I actually put a inside dog off of a 461 on this 500i. It has the standard 462 outside dog that came on the heavy duty clutch cover. Mates right up perfectly. As you can see, this looks like an 044 660 dog. I never checked the number. I never got that excited about it. What I will get excited about is the handlebar operation. They're pretty sweet. They're forward set. I call them a cab forward design. They're going to allow a 3-foot bar usage and tip placement within 1 millimeter, which I really like on a personal level. So, I guess we'll be done tooting my own horn there for a second. So, if we look at the tank version, it says 19.6 pounds. I'm hoping that you can see that right there. It's kind of a lunker. If we want to take a look at the 660, we see that it weighs 19.0 pounds. I don't know how my personal 281 would compare to that saw. Power-wise, once it gets modified, if we look at my 64, they're about a pound lighter. 18.2, so like I said, about a pound lighter. This saw has actually been upgraded with a 54 millimeter bore, so it has a 660 cylinder assembly. It's OEM. I did put that on there. I only did the standard Insano on that saw because I was worried with about 3 million board feet that it might stress the bottom end a little bit too much. And if we look at the 661, 19.2. So the Stihl saws generally have a little bit less weight than the comparable Husqvarna versions we're noticing. The 64 is about a pound lighter than the 66. The 80cc Husqvarna is really heavy, but it's kind of a bad Jose saw. Comes in heavyweight in this operation. They have a big old Mondo spring on the front, which adds a lot of weight to the process too. And the dogs I made, so there's some other little trinkets here and there. We're going to do some test sawing with the 500i in stock form. We've actually done some of that already. Seems to run okay. Has some decent low end power. And now we're gonna test it against some other stock saws like the 661 and the 660, and then we're gonna run it against some zip saws before I end up zipping this one. If we were wondering what zip means, it also ported. It means modified, quote unquote, zippy. Definitely they went all out on the lightweight concept with that saw. It's a little under 80 cc's, relatively close to 281. My prediction, the 281 is going to stomp it into the dirt completely. Even the best job I can do on that 500i at this point. I'm curious to see how the 64 does. That saw doesn't have a lot of time. It runs all right. You know, I mean, I don't even think that thing's broken in yet, to be honest. Anyway, I guess we were kind of talking about this saw in particular here. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting process, I see. Same situation going on as we've noticed and talked about before, the anti-kiss method of handlebar mounting going on right here, but I've also mentioned it's probably a little beefier, a little stronger. We mentioned that this saw is spring mounted. Yeah, it's going to be kind of an interesting process. We're going to have to do some sawing. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this saw being the world's first fuel-injected saw. I guess technically you could say it's the world's first electronically controlled fuel-injected saw. Johnson-Red had a saw a long time ago, maybe even back in the 50s. That was some kind of fuel-injected, probably mechanically at that point. My buddy Dave is doing some research on that. I'm hoping he'll be able to chime in and clarify. We've been talking about that for quite a few years, off and on. He has some interesting insight, being that close. Well, he's really close. He's in Europe, technically, but he's really close to the mainland part of Europe. And so there's stuff that's just known over there because those guys live in that area. And he has some interesting things history-wise that I get to hear about and learn about, I guess, myself. So I'm hoping he'll chime in and offer a clarification there. I figured since this is his saw, we'll let him deal with that part of the program. I'm going to run this thing in stock form against quite a few other saws, and then we're going to run it in zip form. I think one of the saws I want to run this against is my 281, which I think my 281 is going to stomp this thing into the dirt, but you never know. But that's my bet. I don't know if there's any takers out there, but that thing lays waste to my Torque Monster 461. It's not even funny. And so I'm pretty sure it's going to kind of walk all over this saw once it's in zip form. Hopefully I didn't step on anybody's toes with that statement right there. That wasn't really the purpose. We're talking about comparison. You want to talk about performance saw shop stuff. You're looking to see what you can get out of it in the end, based on what you get in the beginning. It's 6.8 horsepower. We're going to get down to the nitty-gritty, and we're going to do some saw testing right now and just see what we can do about enjoying that part of the process. So anyway, check out Dave's channel over there, see what they do. A lot of mechanical work. They do some yarder work too, which is kind of cool. Out in the wood on YouTube, all strung together. Kind of a jolly old chap. Just give it a shot. Anyway, thanks for watching this session. Have a blessed day wherever you might be on God's green earth.